Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
I mean, that term, bloodlust, at the time was, it's a really popular term. It's been around, and it always refers to battle. And it could have been something else.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Kinda Murdery, a true crime podcast that's mostly about murder, and always about the strange and compelling stories that arise when the path less traveled twists to darkness, and those who walk its shadows surrender to violence and moral corruption. We have a perilous journey ahead, so thank you for lending me your courage and good company. I'm your host, Zevin Odelberg, and this is Kinda Murdery, coming to you not soaking wet by the grace of God here in Raining Cats and Dogs, San Diego, California. I'm excited about today's stories. I'm calling the episode Wizards of Death, the true story of Russia's magic murders. First of all, we'll touch on the story of famed Russian mystical wizard and notoriously well-endowed Lazarus man, Rasputin. Seriously, Google it. Now, Rasputin allegedly had Russia's Tsarina Alexandra under his hypnotic spell around the turn of the 20th century, and he was ultimately murdered. Now, it took more than one try to kill him, but the first person to attempt to murder Rasputin was a prostitute named Kionia Gustava in 1914. And after we talk about Rasputin, then we'll go in depth with a modern murder story that has a certain inverse symmetry with that of Russia's famous Mad Monk. I'm talking about the story of Georgy Teramanovich Martirosyan. Excuse me for being terrible at pronouncing Russian, but he was also known as Gosha the Wizard, which is a lot easier to spit out. Russia's murder magician was a serial killer who co-opted the legends of Rasputin's mysticism to lure young women to him and then hold them under his sinister influence like trusting lambs cradled in the jaws of a wolf. Ultimately, he murdered 3 young models, women who he claimed were actually high-class prostitutes, and this all happened in 2011 and 2012. Now, why so much talk about wizards and magic along with our murder stories today? Well, I must admit I've buried the lead here. As I've mentioned in passing before, I play a card game called Magic the Gathering, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. For those that aren't, the quickest and simplest way to describe Magic the Gathering would be to call it Dungeons & Dragons the card game. Each player is a wizard engaged in battle with their opponent wizard. Each player starts with 20 life points and 60 cards in their deck, and they take turn playing their cards or spells until one wizard's life total falls to 0 and they lose the game. Well, Magic the Gathering has been around for 30 years now, since 1993, when yours truly was a fresh-faced, apple-cheeked 11-year-old. I loved the game then, and I rediscovered it about 7 years ago and fell head over heels once more. Now, one of the coolest parts of Magic the Gathering is the amazing original art that's created for each and every card. Art which is fantastical, magical, and incredibly emotionally and intellectually evocative. Art that conveys the functionality of the card and absolutely captures the imagination of the player. Which brings me to why I'm so personally geeked out today. You see, I have a very special guest on today's show. One of the original Magic the Gathering artists, going all the way back to limited edition alpha. A man whose work captured my young imagination in an absolute vice grip. I remember it vividly. The very first time I looked at the bottom left corner of a Magic card to see who the artist was. The name I read, the first name I ever memorized. That's right, the original master of the Magic Macabre, the Viscount of the Visceral, the Baron of Blood. A man who communicates his imagination, his interior world, in a way that will snare your mind and memory and hold it for a lifetime. An artist capable of bringing unnatural life to a horrifying monster, and still imbuing it with a deep humanity that clutches at your heartstrings. He is, dare I say it, the most kinda murdery artist in the 30-year history of Magic. That's right, Anson Maddocks is here. Hey Anson, how you doing? Thanks for being here.
Thanks for letting me in. I'm doing good.
I gotta tell you, I'm thrilled to have you. And I should probably mention that the Kinda Murdery logo is drawn by my friend Taylor Quayle, who I think you also know. And you're his favorite Magic artist and a huge influence on him too. So, indirectly, I feel like you have a lot of influence on how Kinda Murdery is presented to the world. And shout out to Taylor for lending me his talents. We're going to jump into the story pretty quickly here, but before we do, I figured I wanted to ask you a couple quick questions. What is your favorite Magic card that you've drawn? What's your favorite Magic art in your catalog of incredible Magic art?
Ooh, okay. I get that question a lot, and I have an answer ready to go usually. But the truth is, I don't think I have a favorite. I have ones that I really am unhappy with, but there's a few of those. Like I don't like Pyrotechnics or Life Tap. The ones I do like are say Cyclopean Tomb, Darylor.
Yes. Well, every great artist tends to be their own worst critic. Sure. I will tell you my favorite Anson Maddocks art.
Okay.
You just named one of them, Cyclopean Tomb, and hopefully Mark Teaton or any of the other great artists are not listening at the moment. But for my money, and I'm not the only one who thinks this, Cyclopean Tomb is the greatest piece of art painting in the original Magic set. I think.
Thank you.
The artistry and the quality of that illustration is just bar none. I also really like Bloodlust because I like to pump those creatures up, and because I can so clearly remember as a kid just being shocked by it. So, for those who don't know, Bloodlust is a card that implies that your creature gets a lot stronger from drinking blood, and the illustration is basically a wall of pulsating flesh and a woman, probably a vampire or a fallen angel, sort of on her knees, clutching that wall with her face full of hunger, kind of pushing her cheek and face up against this wall of flesh. And I just remember it being feeling, especially when I was a kid, sort of so explicit and edgy that I found it really fascinating.
I can't believe they accepted that, actually, because obviously it was supposed to be some guy with a battle axe or something, just mowing down, his opponents. And right. I was like, yeah, I was feeling a little rebellious and just wanted to try something else. And it went through. And I got a lot of flack for it afterwards.
You sort of have a history of being a little bit rebellious and punk rock in your work. Do you not? I mean, this is not the first time you've raged against the man in your own way, right?
Yeah, I just little ways, kind of, I guess it's sort of passive aggressive to do it visually, but yeah. I don't really, you don't get much traction as an artist, telling the designers, what you think about the title choice of the card. It's
right.
You have to make do with what they give you. And I just, if it was something just a little less, that term Bloodlust at the time was, it's a really popular term. It's been around, and it always refers to battle. And it could have been something else. I don't know.
You took it more literally, somebody who was literally lusting for blood.
I try to put a little bit of, sensuality in all of my pieces. Even the zombies, I try to make a little bit interesting. Like, what would it be like to be a zombie? It'd be nasty, right? You have to
a zombie with a sex drive.
Yeah. Stuffed with potpourri or something.
I personally am very glad that you have that sort of punk rock rebellious streak in your art, because I think it has everything to do with why your art is so great and so memorable and has captured the imagination of so many, because those of us who play Magic are pretty familiar with, fantasy lore and a lot of the frankly incredible art that comes along with it. But as you sort of alluded to, there is a certain similarity thematically to most of that art. And so it's almost like, as a player, if you heard the name of a card, as you said, you feel like you sort of could make a pretty good guess of what that card is going to look like. But when it comes to Anson Maddocks cards, a lot of times you get surprised. And I think that's part of what makes your art so indelible and fascinating. I remember obviously another one of your famous cards is Llanowar Elf, and that being a common card is one that we all actually pulled from a pack or had as a kid. And I remember seeing that elf with what looked like a bone mohawk and going, man, I've never seen an elf like that before. I've read The Lord of the Rings 3 times, and I've read this and that, and I know all about these beautiful, ethereal Orlando Bloom elves. But my gosh, this is a bone mohawk elf. What the hell is going on?
You are exactly who I was trying to reach. It was like,
you did.
Do all elves have to be pretty? Do they all have to, fit the mold, or are some of them little rebels? And do they? I mean, I wanted people to look at it and go, "What the hell? It's an elf."
And I'm really glad you said that. Do all elves have to be pretty? I'm really glad you said that, because that's one of that idea really resonates with Kinda Murdery as a show. Do all stories have to be pretty? Can a story still be of value when it's horrible? And even in a larger sense, human beings as well. I mean, I do a fair amount of outreach for mental health and drug addiction and suicide, and also for people with disabilities. I myself have cerebral palsy, and I think that when you struggle with whether it's mental health or physical issues or addiction, what have you, one of the journeys that's so difficult and so important is coming to a place where you can accept and love yourself, even if you're not the expectation or don't live up to what's normal or generally considered okay. Do all magical creatures have to be beautiful? I would absolutely say no, they don't. And that theme, as a disabled person or a person that's struggled with other issues, is something that's hugely validating and helpful in getting to a place where we can all accept ourselves. And I feel like that's part of what I'm trying to do with the show. And that's also, I think, a big part of why your art resonates with me so much. Just because you're ugly, just because you're broken, and I mean that metaphorically or literally, doesn't mean you can't be the hero. And I think there's something in your art that speaks to that as well that really means a lot to me personally.
I do try to make all the monsters sexy, so so the elves go down a notch and the monsters go up a notch.
Absolutely. Speaking of sexy monsters, why don't we jump into the talking about famed Russian mystic Rasputin?
Okay.
So I am here with Anson Maddocks. We are going to uncover what truths and solve what mysteries we can, and Kinda Murdery's Wizards of Death, the true story of Russia's magic murders, starts now. All right, I should mention right here at the top that there were 3 articles that were particularly crucial in putting this episode together. There was an article on Rasputin from allthat'sinteresting.com by Kiri Piconi, an article in the Russian Times about Gosha the Wizard, and another one in the Daily Beast by Anna Nemstova, also about Gosha the Wizard. But right now, we're about to talk about Rasputin. Now, most people, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Rasputin. Even more people have probably heard of Anastasia, the daughter of Tsar Nicholas II, and his wife Tsarina Alexandra. There was a pretty famous animated movie made about her story, largely fictionalized, came out in 1997. That movie's mostly made up, but the bad guy in that movie, Rasputin, was absolutely real. Rasputin, whose name was Grigory Yefimovich, I'm sure I butchered that as well, please forgive me, was born in Siberia, Russia in 1869. You imagine, Anson, being born in Siberia as opposed to sent there because it's the world's most hellacious prison?
Well, you'd have so much to look forward to when you left, right?
Right, assuming you get to.
Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good point, though, because Rasputin did leave, and he managed to make the most of that exodus. So as a teenager, Rasputin went to the Verkhocher Monastery in Russia, hoping to become a monk. He never completed the program, however, and instead married at the age of 19 and had 3 children. In 1906, he arrived in St. Petersburg, and shortly following was introduced to Tsar Nicholas and his wife, because they were both desperately seeking a cure for their son Alexei, who was heir to the throne and also a hemophiliac. Now, the British monarchy had a hemophiliac prince as well. I don't know. Have you seen the movie? What's it called? How can I blank on this? Have you seen the movie From Hell with Johnny Depp and Ian Holm about Jack the Ripper?
Yeah. And,
yes.
Heather Graham, I think, is it?
Indeed, yes. Well, that movie postulates that Jack the Ripper was actually the personal doctor of Prince Edward, who was the hemophiliac, I believe. But in that movie, they imagined that the prince had contracted a sexually transmitted disease from a sex worker, and that Jack the Ripper was the doctor who had been entrusted with keeping him well, who was so furious at prostitutes for sickening the prince that he went on a revengeful rampage. I guess I should have said spoiler alert, but I failed. Maybe I'll edit it back in there. So there was a hemophiliac prince in the British monarchy. Now we have one in the Russian monarchy, which I think more than anything probably speaks to not enough branches on the family tree, inbreeding, so to speak.
Wink.
Yeah, everybody was a Lannister back then. Everybody was boinking their brothers and sisters and cousins, and hopefully not mothers, but, moving on. So the Prince of Russia was a hemophiliac. His parents were desperate to cure him, and Rasputin had already developed this reputation as a magical, mystical wizard of a man who might have healing abilities that stretched far beyond those of a common doctor. And as we all know, in about 1906, your actual scientific medical doctor was probably more likely to kill you than help you anyway, so maybe they were onto something.
You went on to be a subject for medical testing, to advance future medicine.
Yeah. Yes. And to have the world's largest severed penis, Rasputin, I mean.
Severed?
Well, somehow it ended up in a jar in a museum in Iceland.
Oh, the picoline solution adds 2 or 3 inches.
Well, so that's what I was thinking, actually, is that over like 100-something years, wouldn't it just like a sponge continue to fill with water and expand and expand? I mean, maybe I'm just trying to make myself feel better, but, I'm with you.
We do what we can.
It's funny. I remember when I was a little kid, I got one of those sponge capsules that you put in the water, and like a week later, it becomes a giant dinosaur.
Right.
And so I feel like basically Rasputin's penis in the jar is like that, except obviously not a child's toy. Man.
Just trim your dinosaur.
So yes. Anyway, everybody listening, if you're curious, go ahead and Google like Rasputin penis, because it's a wonder of the world. It's probably worth seeing, assuming you're into that sort of thing. And you're listening to this show, so a lot of you probably are. Okay, back to it. So historians now know, as I just mentioned, that Alexei was a hemophiliac, though at the time the royal family chalked his health problems up to a weak constitution. Rasputin successfully, at least allegedly, cured Alexei and gained the trust of his mother, Tsarina Alexandra, in the process. Now, there are also those who say that he was Alexandra's lover. That's less substantiated, but certainly adds to the romanticism of this tale. There were those who claimed that Rasputin hypnotized the boy. Others say it was dark magic. And still others wonder if the Mad Monk had any healing powers to begin with. I think in today's modern world of science and technology, most people probably just assume he was a charlatan, but he may in fact have been powered by some kind of dark magic or deal with a demon after all. And we'll get to that in a moment. So for the next 5 years or so, Rasputin had large influence over the prince's treatment. However, his presence at the palace and his time spent with the Tsarina prompted a lot of harsh critiques toward the royal family's credibility. He was this large, foreboding, kind of terrifying mystic who had rough manners and just didn't seem to belong at all amongst the Russian aristocracy, let alone as the queen's number one confidant. So overall, the aristocracy was very upset by his constant presence and apparent influence. That said, it probably had less to do with his not belonging and more to do with jealousy over how influential he appeared to be with the rulers of Russia. So Rasputin's rude and unruly behavior and his insistence that he was the Tsarina's advisor was a big issue for the royal family and for the constituents. I feel like a few of the dukes probably, were at a sporting event and went to the bathroom with Rasputin. We're standing next to him in the urinal and saw the size of his dong and just got so insecure that they were like, we got to take this guy out. That's my theory anyway. So, anyway, the general dislike and hatred toward Rasputin got worse when he predicted that tragedy would befall Russia in World War I. And that prediction caused Nicholas to head to war to try to head off the prediction of tragedy and to leave Alexandra in charge of Russia's domestic affairs. So now we have what's building into being almost like a Greek tragedy, right? Because in pretty much every Greek tragedy, somebody brings about the prophecy they fear by attempting to... Whoa.
I'm sorry.
That's a Muppet.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. And I'll turn this down.
No worries. No worries.
That was, that was me.
That's all good. Is that animal or something?
No, it was my phone. And it's a scam likely,
Ah, yeah. Got it.
No, that was me being goofy.
Oh, that was you recording of yourself. Nice.
Yes. La la la.
Sounds good. You'd make a heck of a Muppet.
I'll remember that.
So, in virtually every story about prophecy, the prophecy comes true because the subject of the prophecy tries to stop it from coming true, right? Oedipus or, what have you. There's any number of them. But meanwhile, king goes to war, queen's running the country, Rasputin is her closest advisor, so functionally what happens? He becomes even more powerful and influential than he was before, and people were already mad at him. So, at this point, the Duke and other members of the royal family seek to remove Rasputin from the family's presence. They called him a witch doctor. They said he was using black magic to poison Alexandra's mind. Despite all this, historians now believe that Rasputin actually had little influence in political matters. His influence was all personal around the health of the prince, and possibly, now that the king was at war, possibly a romantic entanglement with Alexandra. So the first attempt on Rasputin's life occurred in 1914, when a prostitute named Kionia Guseva stabbed him in the gut with a dagger. This was thought to be a mortal wound. Eyewitnesses claim that Rasputin's entrails fell from his stomach, that he was literally disemboweled, and that Guseva shouted, "I've killed the Antichrist!" But Rasputin survived the attack. 2 years later, in 1916, the country's distaste for him hit an all-time high, and a group of conspirators, including Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich and Prince Felix Yusupov, set out to kill him. This is where the story gets kind of super wild in terms of what probably a lot of us have heard just about how damned hard it was to kill Rasputin, which is why I referred to him as a Lazarus man, because the dude just would not go down. And so here's what they did. Actually, this seems like a good time to ask you a question, Anson.
Sure.
In this case, no matter how hard they tried, they just couldn't kill Rasputin. Has there ever been a time in your life, whether artistically or otherwise, where you were just trying to do something, trying to crack a nut, trying to figure something out, and you felt like no matter which way you came at it, you just couldn't crack the nut until maybe you finally did? Does anything spring to mind? That sort of dogged frustration moment, you know what I mean?
It happens more lately than it did in the past. I had a lot more confidence in the past. Now I'm really critical of my work, and it takes me some time. I take pictures of the process. So I have photographs of paintings that transform over time to something completely out of the composition that it was originally. Because I'm making little adjustments. Things get bigger and bigger, because when you're struggling with something, it gets magnified when you're doing, making visual art. It's like your mind is saying, you need to get a closer look at this, And plus, when you're painting, borders tend to get pushed out. Then what I usually have to do is either wipe it all off and start over, or just get a new surface and start over. Usually all the things that I'm thinking about while I'm struggling with it go into action on the new piece. So
Interesting. Now, when you said when you're struggling with something, things tend to get magnified, would it be an apt, although gross metaphor to say it's kind of like when you have a zit and people are like, don't touch it, it'll just get bigger.
Yeah. Or it's like just focusing on something more to see if you can figure it out,
So ultimately, though, it sounds like through all this struggle, maybe you create something that you hadn't intended, but that perhaps is cooler or better than what you did intend. Do you feel like it often has a positive outcome?
If I didn't take photographs while I was doing it, it would be a problem. But I have all of these photographs of pieces that no longer exist because I painted over them, or I don't know. I think it comes down to I should probably be a little more careful about my composition before I even start. I tend to just take the surface, sketch out on it, and start painting, and assume that I'm going to figure it out as I go. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's not that easy, but I do discover things that I wouldn't have discovered otherwise, when I go at it that way.
Interesting. Well, I got to tell you, as an Anson Maddocks fan, I now want to see the photography exhibit called Anson Maddocks: The Lost Works. I want to see all these pieces that never existed because you didn't like them, but I might love them. Other people might love them, but now I'm really curious.
Well, the worst thing is when I look at them now, I'm like, what was wrong with that? That was fine. Why didn't you stop there?
Oh, that's funny.
Actually, I can compile all those. It'd be kind of a cool thing to have, I think, all together.
I think there could be a lot of interest in that. I'm very interested in seeing that. So yeah, do that, please, for my sake, if nothing else.
My only fear would be that when people look at how much work I put into it, I would just come across as completely insane.
Well, but that's why we like you so much.
Yeah, I figured, I thought that might be coming. So
yeah,
I'm comfortable with that as long as it, Yeah.
It's your beautiful madness, sir. That's why we're such fans. All right, so let's hop back into trying to kill Rasputin, just like Anson trying to perfect his creation on the canvas. After being disemboweled by the prostitute, which sounds like something your average person would not survive anyway, but Rasputin's fine. So a couple years later, they got to try again. So we've got Grand Duke Dmitri, Prince Felix. They set out to kill him, and what they do is they get Prince Felix's wife to lure Rasputin to their home. Once he's there, the murder conspirators fed Rasputin wine and cakes laced with cyanide. Although it was reportedly enough cyanide poison to kill 5 men, Rasputin was unaffected. This makes me think of The Princess Bride. What you do not know is that I spent the last 5 years building up an immunity to iocane powder, right? Right. Okay. So he eats all these cyanide cakes and he's like, yum, yum, give me some. Can I have some more cyanide cakes, please? He's totally fine. Well, the other people who are unperturbed by the lack of Rasputin dying due to poisoned cake are the people trying to kill him. They go, well, that didn't work, so let's take another shot at it. And they continue to attack him repeatedly. First, they shoot him in the back. He falls on the floor, but then Rasputin, much like some kind of a horror movie killer, like a Michael Myers or a Jason or something, despite being egregiously poisoned and shot in the back, he's still not dead.
So
he jumps.
Did they poison him? I mean, did they shoot him like that night, or was it?
Yeah, like he's sitting at the table munching down the cakes, and they're like, "Well, these aren't killing him. I guess we better just start shooting him." So
no patience.
None.
Let it do its work, man.
Yeah. No, exactly. Well, maybe it wasn't cyanide. It was actually almond extract.
It smells the same.
Yeah, right. That which seems dangerous. Maybe they ought to do something about that. But anyway, so he jumps up off the floor and then he gets shot several more times. And then it falls down again. They wrap his body in a carpet like New Jersey mobsters. They roll him up in the carpet and they chuck him in the Neva River. So his body is pulled from the river 3 days later. Although official autopsy reports differ, most of the autopsy reports state that he was clearly still alive when thrown in the water. They can tell that from the positioning of the body and probably from eventual water in his lungs, because if you're still breathing while drowning, you have water in your lungs. If you're already dead, you don't. So he was still alive despite being shot all these times and poisoned, and that he had tried to break free from the carpet before either drowning or dying from hypothermia. They're not sure which. The cause of his death is still debated. Here's where it gets a little mystical and creepy. Before he died, Rasputin told Tsar Nicholas, "If I am killed by common men, you and your children will rule Russia for centuries to come. If I am killed by a member of your family, you and your family will be killed by the Russian people." Well, he was killed by the Grand Duke, and just 2 years later, as we know, tragically, during the Russian Revolution, the Tsar and his entire family were rounded up, taken to a basement, and murdered. So was that, if not the culmination of Rasputin's prophecy, the revenge of his angry ghost? Who's to say?
Did wonders for the superstitious folks of that land, I'm sure. If it wasn't already bad enough.
Yeah. No kidding, right? No kidding. Boy. All right. So now that we've hit on Rasputin, the wizard, we're going to talk about this much more modern case of Gosha, the wizard. But before we get into that, I'd like to chat, Anson, I'd like to chat with you a little bit more. Here's one. I'm sure I'm not the first person to ask you this, but who is your favorite magic artist who's not you, and why? If you're willing to say, or you could just, if you want to say one of my favorite artists is, that's fine too. I'm not trying to, put you on the spot here.
I would be forgiven by all the other artists if I say that, my very good friend, Mark Tadine, is probably my favorite artist because I grew up with him, working next to him, developing my skills next to him. And it is Tadine, by the way.
Tadine.
This is a good venue to say that his name is pronounced Mark Tadine.
Wow, I'm embarrassed now. I'm going to have to go back and edit me saying Tadine out.
No.
Tadine, just kidding.
95% of the people that I've heard pronounce his name pronounce it Tedin. So
Tedin?
Yeah.
Interesting. I've always said Tedin, and I was wrong too.
So he won't correct people. Like if they're right in front of him, if they say Tedin, he doesn't say anything. And I'm always like, if I can hear it, I'm like, it's Tadine.
It's pretty funny because he also is so legendary that he is, I guess, humble enough to not correct people.
He's a super nice guy. He's extremely polite, and some of our friends have made up jokes about him keeping frozen heads in his basement in a freezer, which I don't think is true.
So he's so kind, it's almost suspicious,
exactly.
Like Mr. Rogers or something.
Exactly. Like, who would make the best serial killer, right?
Yeah, that's right. So since your kind of murderiness is on the surface, that actually makes you less threatening. We can see it. But with Mark, you're saying, I don't know about that guy. He might be into some weird shit. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Well, I think my mother raised me to not watch Mr. Rogers because she was afraid that I would trust people who were
in cardigans. She didn't want you to trust people in cardigans.
Yeah, people who were overly seemingly trustworthy are potentially the worst. And I was a kid. And that was the reasoning that she gave me. And she would tell me examples of things that might happen to me. And I can't even say I'm here.
Yeah. I feel you. My dad had a version of that he told me once. And of course, this doesn't apply to anyone who may be an alcoholic. And I don't mean this insensitively. But his version of it was never trust a man who doesn't drink. And what he actually meant by that was not literally drink, but if you can't see a person's vices or occasional glimpses of a recognizable darkness, then maybe they're up to some really scary shit that they feel like they need to hide all the time. Yeah. So a similar lesson as your mother was trying to impart, I think, perhaps.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
So we're really suspicious about Mark Tadeen's character is what you're saying. I just want to put this in quotes, I'm just teasing.
I honestly, I don't think he has a scary bone in his body. He's actually extremely funny, and I don't ever see him cutting loose and showing people how funny he is. But since I grew up with him, I had constant entertainment all the time.
That's awesome. Well, and of course, his work is just phenomenal. I mean,
it's amazing.
We all love it so much. So what's your favorite Mark Tadeen card? What's the one? Is there one where you're like, God, I wish I'd drawn that one, or I just love that one, or which card would it be?
There's a lot of them, but I remember sitting across from him in a cafe in like 92 or 93 probably, when he was doing Lord of the Pit. And I was thinking, graphic styles, that would save some time, and that looks really good. Maybe I should do some of that. I liked. He doesn't use reference very often, and he just comes up with this stuff out of his head, which we both did. But
whole back cloth, then, both of you guys, right straight from the head, like Athena breaking out of Zeus. That's incredible.
Well,
you know what, Anson? Before you answer, I thought this was just going to be one episode, but honestly, you're so awesome, and we have so much good stuff, and we haven't even told the Gosha the Wizard story yet, and this is all just too good. So I'm going to save it. So everybody out there listening, if you want to hear more about Anson Maddocks and Mark Tadeen's creative process in the early 90s, we're talking about before limited edition alpha here, guys. And if you want to hear about Russian serial killer Gosha the Wizard, who was killing back in the early 2010s and lays claim to being the 21st century's Rasputin, then come right back here this Sunday, March 26th, as I continue my conversation with legendary Magic the Gathering artist Anson Maddocks, and we dive, hanging wizard sleeves first, into the story of Gosha the Wizard. I think Anson might tell us a personal kind of murdery story too. So please do check out AnsonMaddocks.com. There's a link in the show notes. Call 888-MURDERY to share your feedback or tell your story so you can inspire an episode of the show. Until next time, for Anson Maddocks, I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery. All right, let's get down to business. You are here for part 2 of Wizards of Death with legendary Magic the Gathering artist Anson Maddocks. If you've already heard part 1, you'll recall hearing the story of the murder of famed Russian mystic Rasputin. Today, we'll be covering the murders committed by another self-proclaimed Russian mystic, Gosha the Wizard, who murdered 3 Russian models in 2011 and 2012. Right now, though, I'm going to rewind just a bit and rejoin my conversation with Anson Maddocks. At this point, we're discussing Anson's childhood friend and another all-time great magic artist, Mark Tadeen. Specifically, we're talking about the fact that Mark is so kind that some of his friends find it just a little bit suspicious. Alright, get ready as Anson and I uncover what truths we can and solve what mysteries we may. Kinda Murdery's Wizards of Death with Anson Maddocks, Part 2, Gosha the Wizard, starts now.
He's a super nice guy. He's extremely polite, and some of our friends have made up jokes about him keeping frozen heads in his basement in a freezer, which I don't think is true.
So he's so kind, it's almost suspicious, like
exactly.
Mr. Rogers or something.
Exactly. Like, who would make the best serial killer, right?
Yeah, that's right. So since your kind of murderiness is on the surface, that actually makes you less threatening. We can see it. But with Mark, you're saying, I don't know about that guy. He might be into some weird shit. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Well, I think it might. My mother raised me to not watch Mr. Rogers because she was afraid that I would trust people who were
in cardigans. She didn't want you to trust people in cardigans.
Yeah, people who were overly seemingly trustworthy are potentially the worst. And I was a kid and that was the reasoning that she gave me. And she would tell me examples of things that might happen to me, and I can't even say I'm here.
Yeah. I feel you. My dad had a version of that he told me once, and of course, this doesn't apply to anyone who may be an alcoholic, and I don't mean this insensitively, but his version of it was never trust a man who doesn't drink. And what he actually meant by that was not literally drink, but if you can't see a person's vices or occasional glimpses of a recognizable darkness, then maybe they're up to some really scary shit that they feel like they need to hide all the time. So a similar lesson as your mother was trying to impart, I think, perhaps.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
So we're really suspicious about Mark Tudin's character, is what you're saying. I just want to put this in quotes, I'm just
no, I honestly, I don't think he has a scary bone in his body. He's actually extremely funny, and I don't ever see him cutting loose and showing people how funny he is. But since I grew up with him, I had constant entertainment all the time.
That's awesome. Well, and of course, his work is just phenomenal. I mean,
it's amazing.
We all love it so much. So, what's your favorite Mark Tudin card? What's the one? Is there one where you're like, God, I wish I'd drawn that one, or I just love that one, or which card would it be?
There's a lot of them, but I remember sitting across from him in a cafe in like 92 or 93 probably, when he was doing Lord of the Pit. And I was thinking, graphic styles, that would save some time, and that looks really good. Maybe I should do some of that. I liked he doesn't use reference very often, and he just comes up with this stuff out of his head, which we both did, but
whole cloth, both of you guys right straight from the head, like Athena breaking out of Zeus. That's incredible. Well,
at the time, if you had time to go to the library and get some reference, I went to the magazine store a lot, and I would kind of get magazines that had a bunch of different kinds of subjects. That would kind of help me get some inspiration. But we didn't have the ability to sit down and just type something in and have it shower us with images. Right. So if we're doing something and the deadline was extremely tight, we would do the best we could with what we knew.
You're right. No internet. Like, I remember 1994, my first friend got the internet, and it was dial-up, and we're high school freshmen. So what do? We'd come home after school, and his mom wouldn't be home from work yet, and we would go looking for porn. But when I say porn, what I mean is that we would find like a single still image, the equivalent of a picture in a Playboy, and I remember that it would take 20 or 30 minutes. It would be downloading by about the 16th of an inch. And like by the time we made a snack and ate it and did some homework, we might get one picture of a naked lady. So
and it's like,
right. But
not really
so
what I thought
to
it was
your
gonna
point, even if you had tried to use the internet looking for reference images, it would have been incredibly inefficient. You'd see one picture after like 35 minutes of waiting.
Right. But the thing is that a lot of the card titles then were sort of with that built into it. So people, I think now you can put more abstract meaning into the cards, because people can, if they don't know what a word is, they can go and look it up easily. But then it was like, if you think about the titles of the first edition, they were all pretty straightforward, except for maybe it would include the name of a type of goblin or elf or something that, you understood that to be just like a tribe or a...
Right. Like a Llanowar.
You'd figure it out later.
Yeah. So...
Right. Exactly. I mean, Sengir Vampire, actually, when I did the art for it, the title was Vampire. So I was thinking, okay, I need to make this iconic.
And you
it has
sure
to be
did,
something that is,
by the way.
Right. So it didn't have any specific family or, anything as an association with something in particular. It was just a blood-sucking monster.
So where did you get the name Sengir?
And they added that later when they knew that things were going to be getting bigger, and they started thinking ahead, and they would give, because they knew there might be more vampires, but I didn't know that.
So they picked a family.
So they would,
so to speak, like a...
Yeah. And so other vampires would come, and they would have a different prefix.
I still am now curious where Sengir came from. Now I want to know that. Interesting.
I don't really know. I was thinking maybe it had something to do with like sanguine or
yes, I bet that sounds right. All right, let's get back to some more murdery wizard stories, huh?
Yeah.
So this is the story of Gosha the Wizard. Now, something I like to think about, I was a theater major in college, theater and political science, and in both theater and political science, there's this sort of idea of, in theater it's called the genealogy of performance, and which means the different generations of sort of the same persona. Like you might say that Douglas Fairbanks Jr. was the first Clark Gable, and that George Clooney is this generation's Clark Gable, and that there will be the next generation there will be another Clooney. Or maybe it goes Paul Newman, Robert Redford, Brad Pitt. Now, I'm not interested in arguing the accuracy of this example. People could feel free to disagree with me, but this idea that the same sort of public persona or archetype reoccurs throughout history is something that I'm pretty darn fascinated by in both theater and in politics. And I think here with Gosha the Wizard, we're about to hear a story where Gosha may, in fact, in a sort of genealogy of performance sense, be our generation's Rasputin, although Rasputin perhaps doesn't deserve the comparison. But that's sort of the connection between these two stories. So, Gosha the Wizard, his name was Georgy Teramanovich Maddocks, was born in 1969 in Georgia, Russia, not Atlanta, Georgia. So he's a Russian serial killer, he's a magician, and a self-proclaimed spiritual healer. And what he would do is he would lure young aspiring models to his apartment, where he would drug them and cause them to overdose, killing 3 women and possibly a 4th between 2011 and 2012. Now, all 3 of his known victims had slim bodies, long legs, and blonde hair. And they all believed that Gosha the Wizard had the power to clean up their karmas and multiply their fortune. Born in Tbilisi to an Armenian family, he moved to the European part of the Soviet Union, so essentially East Germany, Czechoslovakia sort of area, when he was 2 years old. And then following the USSR's collapse, he went on adventures exploring various countries in the post-Soviet era. In Belarus, he was convicted of theft and served a short prison sentence before moving back to Russia. Then, in the late 1990s, he joined a gang of robbers who broke into apartments, but they were eventually captured and imprisoned. Fortunately for Gosha, he was released under amnesty in the year 2000 in honor of the 55th anniversary of Victory Day. So, this guy who was already a petty criminal in multiple times and places got let out because Russia was celebrating the defeat of Nazi Germany in the year 2000, which seems like sort of a mercurial reason if you ask me, but hey, whatever works for you, I guess. But obviously letting him out to celebrate the defeat of Nazi Germany turned out to be a tragic decision.
Yeah.
For the next 7 years, he worked in a variety of jobs, including as a cook, a chauffeur, a salesman, and a logger. Then, in 2007, he made himself a profile on the popular Russian dating site Mamba.ru. There, Maddocks presented himself as a magician and a spiritual healer, a Rasputin, if you will. He was allegedly capable of curing ailments, healing bad karma, and this is when, in 2007, on the dating site Mamba.ru, he began referring to himself as Gosha, the magician. Man, even though he's an awful murderer, now I want to see a magic card called Gosha the Magician, preferably illustrated by Anson Maddocks.
It kind of reminds me of Dushka Dugoshka, which I think is what the Yugoslavians called Bugs Bunny.
Really? Say it again. Dushka.
Dushka Dugoshka. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong.
Well, all I can say, that's interesting. All I can say is let's hope that the expanded universe doesn't extend to Looney Tunes, huh?
Yeah, no kidding.
My God. Here's my new Planeswalker, Porky Pig. Anyway. Oh, right.
Wily.
Nah, I'd almost play a Wily, to be honest, but all right, let's get back on track here. So initially, his business as Gosha the magician, karma healer, and etc. was slow, but his strange rituals earned him regular clients. Using a combination of Wicca and Rasputin-influenced mysticism, he would take girls to an isolated monastery where he would light candles and sacrifice rams in order to cast spells of good fortune. Okay, so just a note to all the young people listening. If a man is going to take you alone to a monastery and then sacrifice a black ram in front of you for good luck, don't go. And if you do go, run. These days, there are pretty much no good magic rituals that involve sacrificing black rams. Maybe in ancient Greece there were, now not so much. That ought to be a major red flag. If you meet a guy on a dating app and he takes you to a isolated monastery to slit some sheep throats, don't go on a second date. That's just my advice, but
this might be a good time to promote veganism, you know? Like if that happens in front of a vegan, they're probably not going to stick
there
around.
You go. So become a vegan so that you don't get murdered by the next Gosha the Wizard. Yeah, there you go. All right, so he would take him to the monastery, light candles, and sacrifice rams in order to cast spells of good fortune. Then in 2009, a high-class escort named Rima became his client. And she enjoyed Gosha the Wizard's services so much that she told her friends about him. His fame spread through word of mouth, and not long after, he amassed enough wealth to afford a 2-story house in a neighborhood in Korolyov, where he lived with his common-law wife and young daughter, and frequently went on vacations to various countries around the world. So basically, this guy was just using pop culture mysticism and sheep murder as an excuse for his gallivanting polyamory. That's what it sounds like to me. But so according to Gosha, among his clients, numbering around 40 or 50 women, there were some famous singers and numerous beauty pageant competitors between the ages of 18 and 50. As a rule of thumb, Gosha turned down all men applying for his services and only accepted women, most of whom were young, rich, and gullible, and would sometimes even sleep with him as part of his rituals. So, sounds like he was an itinerant cult leader, like a wandering cult leader, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I've never wondered if he has a book. You know, his techniques, or it just doesn't sound like my MO.
This guy Mystery wrote a book called The Game about
his name is Mystery.
Secret Society of Pickup Artists, and it was all of his rules for how to get women. I actually had a boss who gave me a copy of this book, which I never read because I just thought it was too gross. But he's the one who popularized and invented this idea of negging, which is be mean to the girl that you want so she feels insecure, so she wants your approval. And
so he never graduated from throwing rocks at girls on the playground?
His other things were things like peacocking, which is like make yourself bizarrely noticeable, like wear like a giant green and purple Cat in the hat and like huge sunglasses and a ton of jewelry so that you stand out in a crowd. A bunch of absurd things where you basically treat women like dumb animals, and that supposedly makes them want to sleep with you. I'm off track here, but that was what when you said wrote a book, I suddenly thought of that.
You know, I'm glad that disgusting murderers have those traits as well, so we can kind of get rid of them when we get rid of the killer.
There you go.
You know?
Yeah, so we all can sort of see through the bullshit. Exactly. Yeah, no Mr. Rogers there. Yeah, exactly. All right. From the tattoos and muscular arms to the heavy jawline and intense look, no conscious person, upon studying Georg Matarosian's features, would want to share intimate secrets with him. I mean, apparently looked like just as scary as he actually was. But apparently he did, in fact, attract a lot of beautiful women. And some of them wanted their health problems treated. Others were looking for career improvement or rich husbands. Most of his quote-unquote patients stayed with Gosha for years and trusted every word he said. According to his website, Gosha charged $200 per visit. In one post, he addressed Moscow's forlorn young women saying, "Dear ladies who feel lonely in soul and in bed, I am yours at any time. I welcome those who want to be happy." All the victims, young ladies, allegedly engaged in prostitution. They knew about Gosha's paranormal powers and are said to have visited him to cleanse their karma. So, from pagan to Orthodox times, including in Rasputin's time, right, Russians have long dabbled in various mystical rituals. They made pilgrimages to churches for blessed healing water or to old grandmothers for folksy spells. In fact, a few weeks ago, we did a story called The Witch of Vladimirovich about exactly this, a hedge witch who poisoned a whole bunch of people. She may, in fact, have been the world's most prolific serial killer, but it was common, especially around the turn of the century, for Russians to go to explicitly titled and, in fact, licensed by the state witches. Being a witch doctor was an actual officially recognized profession, and you had to pay the government for a license to do it. So the point here being that as wild as this all sounds, there's actually a really long, even ancient cultural tradition of believing in these sorts of mystics and in the efficacy of what they do, which adds a little bit of understanding to why this guy was so successful. People weren't just dumb. It's like this is something you do in Russia.
It's hard to argue with something your grandmother told you since you were a kid.
Right. That's what.
Like a lot of these beliefs are very persistent, and if every other person believes in it, then it makes it harder to get away from.
And that's also why it's so darn difficult to stamp out, intolerant or bigoted beliefs that we all may sort of know are well past their time and odious, but as you're alluding to, when generations of people espouse them, or when they're espoused by somebody you love deeply, even if that particular belief is wrong, it can be hard to condemn a person you love, which can make it difficult as well to pull yourself away from a belief that you may find distasteful, speaking generally.
Right. It's hard to walk away from something when you're defending one of your loved ones,
right.
The things that they believe in, and somebody else is like bashing it.
Right.
You can be torn in that moment.
Right, and I think there's a fair amount of our culture war that can be part of that when you take a hard line and you say, anyone who's ever said or thought this is a terrible, horrible person. And then people think to themselves, well, I believe that this is terrible and horrible, but my grandfather was wonderful, and I see him as being from just another time. And if what you're requiring of me is to repudiate my love of my family, then I'm more likely to tell you to fuck off as opposed to update my beliefs to something more palatable. I think that's a real human thing. Yeah. So anyway, so here we go back to it. Yeah, long history of this stuff in Russia. Whether it's fortune-telling mirrors or bringing back dead people from the grave, in modern Russia, the belief of the power of the wizard lives on. Every kiosk sells newspapers publishing long lists of advertisements for masters of magic who promise to fix a person's success in love, sexual life, or business. Masters of magic, huh? In the context of Magic the Gathering, although I play a lot of it myself, I don't think a master of magic would be the person I would necessarily go to first to fix my love or sexual life. Just gonna throw that out there. Oh boy.
I'm not gonna say anything.
I'm just kidding, ladies. You know I love you, in the words of Marshall Mathers. Okay, moving on. So, as an artist, do you have a sense of what it is or why it is that you are drawn creatively to the macabre, the visceral, the dark, whatever we want to call it, the kind of murdery, if you will? Do you know what it is about it that fascinates you?
It might be that it's safe for me to explore that, with media, just creatively. because it doesn't leave the surface, that I'm putting it on.
That makes sense.
And so it's easy to see like how far into that, you can explore. And I do find that familiarizing yourself with something that is disturbing can actually take some of the wind out of it.
Interesting.
Like,
interesting.
There was a time that I was surprised in the bathroom by a spider. It was a huge spider.
Mm-hmm.
And I picked up a can of shaving cream and threw it at it, and it didn't make it. But I couldn't get to sleep.
Because you're like, this spider's going to be crawling up my leg in bed.
It's like, how many friends does it have? Yada, yada.
Right.
And so what I did was I went back to the bathroom and I collected the pieces of the spider and I glued it to an index card. I filled his crushed body with some acrylic medium and I went right to sleep.
Huh.
Something about the process of dealing with it, interacting with it, removed my, sort of the what if, and the what's behind you.
That's
kind
so
of thing.
Interesting. So I think I hear you saying that it is directly therapeutic for you, that it's a way for you to face, harness, and overcome your fears or dark thoughts to some extent.
It was so obviously effective that I employ it in things later. I like things that really disturb me. I will just mentally face them and kind of run it over a few times, and it takes a lot of the power out of it.
That's awesome. That's really cool to hear. That makes a lot of sense to me. I also have to say, so when you threw the shaving cream at the spider, it sounds like you nailed it. So did you play baseball or anything? Because
I did. No, it was luck.
Or nerves of steel. I mean, I feel like if I'm terrified and I throw anything at a spider, which, although big, like you said, aren't that big in terms of as a target. So I'm impressed that you hit the sucker.
Well, it could have more to do with its size and how close it was to me.
Fair enough. I really like what you said about, darkness serving a therapeutic effect, because that's something that I feel like I have encountered doing this show as well, where even though I'm doing a true crime show, I am not traditionally in my life. I haven't been like a huge horror movie fan or death metal fan or something like that. Usually because I have an overactive imagination. I get nightmares and stuff. So I always kind of wondered, like, what is it that people love so much about really disturbing movies, or what is it that they love about this music that sometimes just sounds like a chainsaw running in front of your face or something. And what I've heard from people, and heard from people listening to the show as well, is that sometimes if you're a person who feels like there's a lot of darkness inside you, that dark things, whether it's art or music or movies or podcasts, can actually make you feel normal. There's like this, I kind of feel this way all the time, and I feel my otherness from other sort of stable, happy people, if you will. But when I consume this darker media, I feel like the darkness inside me is almost normalized, and I feel more at peace with myself. And so something that sounds really hectic to somebody else actually can generate peace in another person. And that really kind of was super interesting to me.
Yeah. If you're always looking at something happening, you're feeling apart from it. Mm-hmm. And I, regardless of the art that I do, I'm not, what do you call it? I don't have the madness of somebody that would be in my work,
Right.
I mean, I'm telling you that, so obviously that means right. I am, but
no, right. But yeah, I take your point, and like I said, I think it's so cool that you described it as a way to face and confront your own fear, because you hear sort of ad nauseum that the only way to move through something is to face it directly. We all need to confront our fears, etc. But obviously that can be a really difficult and frightening thing to do. And the fact that you've been able to use your art, which is obviously something that you love and are passionate and energized by, use your art as a way to confront fears, which is something that is so hard to do for most people. I mean, I think that's really inspiring and hopefully useful and helpful knowledge for others. It certainly is for me. So thank you for that.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, you know what, Anson? It's happened again. First I thought this was going to be a 1-episode conversation. Then I thought it would be a 2-episode conversation. And here we are again with just too much good stuff left to talk about and too much good Gosha the Wizard to fit into a single episode. And so, if you want to hear the finale of Gosha the Wizard and more from Anson Maddocks, please do tune in this Thursday, March 30th for Part 3 of Wizards of Death with Anson Maddocks. And this will be the thrilling conclusion of Gosha the Wizard. And if you happen to play old school Magic the Gathering, I hope to see you next weekend at the Risk. Shout out to Chris Pepin and Denny Griffith for all they do for the community. I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery. It was common, especially around the turn of the century, for Russians to go to explicitly titled and in fact licensed by the state witches. Being a witch doctor was an actual officially recognized profession, and you had to pay the government for a license to do it. So the point here being that as wild as this all sounds, there's actually a really long, even ancient cultural tradition of believing in these sorts of mystics and in the efficacy of what they do, which adds a little bit of understanding to why this guy was so successful. People weren't just dumb. It's like this is something you do in Russia.
It's hard to argue with something your grandmother told you since you were a kid.
Right. That's what.
Like a lot of these beliefs are very persistent.
Yeah.
And if every other person believes in it, then it makes it harder to get away from.
Yeah, that's true, and that's also why it's so darn difficult to stamp out, intolerant or bigoted beliefs that we all may sort of know are well past their time and odious, but as you're alluding to, when generations of people espouse them, or when they're espoused by somebody you love deeply, even if that particular belief is wrong, it can be hard to condemn a person you love, which can make it difficult as well to pull yourself away from a belief that you may find distasteful, speaking generally.
Right. It's hard to walk away from something when you're defending one of your loved ones,
Right.
The things that they believe in, and somebody else is like bashing it. You can be torn in that moment.
Right. So here we go, back to it. Long history of this stuff in Russia. Whether it's fortune-telling mirrors or bringing back dead people from the grave, in modern Russia, the belief of the power of the wizard lives on. Every kiosk sells newspapers publishing long lists of advertisements for masters of magic who promise to fix a person's success in love, sexual life, or business. Masters of magic, huh? I'm not sure. In the context of Magic the Gathering, although I play a lot of it myself, I don't think a master of magic would be the person I would necessarily go to first to fix my love or sexual life. Just gonna throw that out there. Oh boy.
I'm not gonna say anything.
So such alternative healers in magic thrive in the country where only 15% of the population trusts the state medical system. This is according to the Levada Center survey, and where many citizens remain suspicious of the merits of modern medicine. So there's maybe a political consequence thing happening here too, where in a country where the government is so repressive and controlling, because the modern medical system is run by the repressive state, people are much less likely to trust a traditional doctor, which makes them, in sort of a zero-sum game sense, more likely to trust these charlatan wizards. So there's your context. So despite his lavish lifestyle, Madarozhin's greed got the better of him, and he devised a scheme to earn cash even quicker. Here it was. He would befriend a future victim and use his charm to convince them to transfer all of their funds into cash, bag the cash, and go to him, where the two would ostensibly travel to a grandmother living 300 kilometers away from Moscow. Gosha would claim that they would amass numerous riches via his magical powers. So what his scam was that these people bought into was take all the money you have, bring it to me, and I will essentially, like tribbles, cause your money to physically multiply alongside my grandmother right there in front of your face. Which just sounds super wacky, but people buy into all kinds of stuff, I guess.
It does kind of sounds like church, too.
Yeah. I will bless your cash, and you will have more cash. Yeah.
Yeah, what is it, a seed or something?
Yeah, right. Oh, man. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's
Please go on.
No, it's true. It's true. I mean, I don't want to get too far afield. I respect everyone's beliefs, but you have a point there. Oh, I would be remiss. Now, you mentioned you went to the magazine store sometimes to look for visual inspiration. So what were some magazines that you found some visual inspiration in?
The French photo magazines, I had a lot of those. They were the high contrast going between, sexy images to kind of shocking images. It was kind of pulpy reference material.
Got it. Can you give me any actual titles of any of the magazines? Do you recall any of them?
French photo is...
it's
I don't
called
think
French.
they call it. Well, I don't think it's French photo. It's just it's photo magazine, and the French version of it is a lot different than the American version.
Got it. Very cool.
Difference between heavy metal and metal hurlant.
So was heavy metal another one that you would sometimes look at?
It was. Yeah,
I remember those very well too. Yeah.
I was collecting those since I was 9 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, as long as it wasn't too violent, my mom was pretty okay with me absorbing media.
Much less
kinds.
concerned about violence than sex. My parents too. Yeah.
Exactly.
Going back to your mom didn't let you watch Mr. Rogers because she didn't want you to trust strangers which is an amazing call. It totally makes sense. He's sort of humorous in light of what a sort of cultural luminary Mr. Rogers has become all these years later. But just the other day I was out with my daughter Daisy, who's 11, and she tells me a joke, and she goes, "Dad," she says, "what's a kidnapper's favorite shoes?" You want to guess what a kidnapper's favorite shoes are?
Oh, I don't know.
White Vans.
Oh, God.
Oh, my
You know
goodness.
what? Brenda's going to love that.
Yeah.
My wife has the most horrific jokes.
Yeah. I was like, well, I guess, honey, I'm glad that you were aware of that. That's sort of the direction I went with it. But I was reminded of that when you mentioned your mom.
Oh, yeah. My opinion of Mr. Rogers is better than it was then.
Yeah. All right, then it's been decided. We like Mr. Rogers just the way he is. Dead and buried. I kid. Of course, Fred Rogers is basically a saint. Speaking of saints, let's dive back into the story of our sinner, huh? We return to Gosha the Wizard. So the first potential victim that he chooses is a married businesswoman named Olga R. But to his surprise, he accidentally picked a cannier woman than he thought, and she caught onto his bluff and cut off all contact with him. So he thought to himself, well, this plan doesn't really seem to be working. So he got rid of the money and grandmother part of the plan, and instead offered to perform magic rituals in his clients' homes. Maddocks' first alleged victim was 23-year-old Natalia Trapeznikova, a beauty queen and aspiring model who arrived in Moscow from Nizhny Novgorod, looking for love and success. She used to thumb through photos of rich bankers in Russian Forbes, dreaming that one of them would marry her one day. She saved money for a business startup, her friend said, but then she apparently fell in with Gosha the Wizard. Due to an injury she'd suffered as a teenager while rowing, Natalia suffered from spinal disc herniation, which caused her pain and discomfort while walking in heels and on the catwalk. During her last visit home, Natalia reportedly told her parents that a Moscow magician named Gosha had advised her, and here we go, this is similar to the original scheme, had advised her to withdraw all the cash she had in her bank accounts to give to him so that he could charge the money with energy meant to multiply her fortunes. Her father, Valery, protested against the strange affair, but his daughter apparently did not listen to them. He said Natalia liked round figures. She said she had 1 million rubles, which is more, or was at the time, more than $30,000. After being taken in by Gosha's claims of spiritual healing several years before, he'd managed to convince her to cut off contact with her boyfriend and convince her that a friend from the modeling agency had attempted to poison her. So, just like a cult leader, again, he's isolating her from the good influences in her life and convincing her that they're bad influences. So he got her to cut off contact with the people who might protect her, and knowing that she fully believed in everything he said, he came up with this give me your $30,000 scheme. On September 21st, 2011, she arrives in Moscow and sits waiting for him in her apartment. At some point during the night, he arrives and enters and offers to make drinks for them. Then he went to the kitchen and got a glass of alcohol, which he laced with a mixture of heroin and methadone. Not long after drinking it, Natalia passes out, and Gosha injects her with a syringe containing more heroin before disposing of it and giving her another clean one in an attempt to simulate an overdose. However, either by miscalculation or by underestimating the strength of Natalia, she didn't die but simply remained unconscious. Anxious that his plan wasn't working, this guy takes her to the bathroom and drowns her. Then he pours out some food for her dog, grabs the cash in the kitchen and some extra jewelry, and leaves. The following morning, Natalia's parents have been calling her, and she's not obviously answering or returning her calls. So they call Maddocks. Actually, they write to Maddocks through a mutual friend that knew both of them, and asked what happened to Natalia. And Gosha the Wizard, Maddocks, claimed that he hadn't seen her in 4 days and that she was on vacation in Georgia. Alarmed, her parents travel to Moscow, and upon arrival, they notice that the light has been left on in her apartment. They contact the landlady, who opens the door and finds Natalia dead in the bathtub. So apparently, because of that herniated disc back injury that I had referred to earlier, Natalia did have something of a history with pain-killing drugs, and so even her parents initially suspect that she may in fact have overdosed. But then they start to wonder if something else might have occurred, because the syringe, ultimately the police tell them, lacked any fingerprints, and it appeared to have been scrubbed precisely, as though somebody had made a great effort to erase the evidence of another party, which we know somebody did, Gosha the Wizard. But despite these suspicions, no official criminal investigation was initiated. Well, 4 months later, 2 more of Maddocks' patients were found dead under similar circumstances. Through his contact with models, he came across 21-year-old Maria and 38-year-old Natalia, same name as the first victim, Natalia Argakovi, a mother and daughter from Krasnodar. Man, this is I am having a tough time with all these originally Cyrillic transcribed into English names. My apologies. I feel like a rank amateur here, but
it's a lot of consonants.
Yeah, come on, Russians, make it easier for me. You don't have anything else more important going on right now, do you? All right. So he kills a mother and daughter. Same deal. They're found dead in their apartments, apparently from overdose. Each of them had more than 20 times as much heroin in their bodies as the first Natalia. So clearly Gosha thought, gosh, I almost didn't use enough on the first lady. So he just really went for it on the second 2. And they're found in the same way. He then moves on again. And he is believed to, although not convicted of, he is believed to have been involved in the disappearance of a 4th woman named Ina Filipova, a 31-year-old businesswoman from the same town who was a longtime client of his, who on December 29th, 2011, was last seen carrying all of her savings with her and was en route to Gosha's apartment. Her body has never been found. While examining the Argakovs' apartment, this is the mother and daughter pair of victims, investigators noticed something peculiar. In the ashtray, next to the light cigarettes that Natalia was known to smoke, they found standard ones with teeth imprints of an unidentified male. After investigating their friends and their phone call histories, they were eventually led to Maddocks. Coincidentally, perhaps, he smoked the same type of cigarettes, which were also found in the first Natalia Trapnikova's ashtray. So this guy who had been so careful about some things left his teeth-bitten cigarettes in the ashtrays of all of his victims. That don't seem so smart.
Not as bad as Ted Bundy, though. He left his teeth prints on one of his victims, at least.
Yeah, that's considering that so many people are identified by dental records, that does seem pretty foolish for a purportedly genius-level intellect, that's for sure.
Exactly.
So he left his bitten cigarettes in the ashtrays of all of his victims. Gosha, with the cigarette connection, was arrested and his house was searched, at which point the authorities found 6.6 kilos of heroin on the premises. I have a question. Instead of murdering all these women and taking their life savings, how about just sell 6.6 kilos of heroin? That's worth some money. I mean, did he get...
It obviously wasn't just about the money.
Obviously. I mean, I was going to say, did he even get enough money from his victims to pay for all the heroin he bought to kill them? You know?
It might... Your sentence for selling heroin in Russia might be worse than murder.
Model murder, yeah.
Yes.
Thinking of selling heroin in Russia? Don't. Just murder models.
Yeah.
Ay. All right. They find all that heroin, at which point he admits to being in the first victim's apartment, but he claims that she had gotten drunk, done cocaine, and then had oral sex with him before she undressed and went to the bathroom, and then he felt grossed out by it all, packed his stuff and left. That was his version of that story.
Mm-hmm.
But the police, who initially had failed to check the security footage, which is bizarre, checked it now and discovered that you could clearly see Gosha leaving the apartment carrying with him some kind of heavy package. At which point they now had enough evidence to charge him with the murders when you combine the security footage with the heroin, as well as the decorations and cards, which I hadn't mentioned yet, but they found a bunch of knickknacks that had belonged to his second set of mother and daughter victims in his home. But originally, it had taken more than a year for the police to investigate the first murder. The chairman of the security committee of the state parliament in Russia, a man named Alexander, said that, quote, "There are as many charlatans among policemen as among magicians." That seems like a quote for a bumper sticker or a t-shirt. And if it weren't for Keenstein's involvement, Gosha the Wizard might still be luring beautiful women to his services. But the chairman of the security committee, upon hearing the pleas of Natalia, the first Natalia's parents, pushed the police to look into the killing. They discovered, as I said, the security footage, and which also included not only Maddocks, but Trapsnikova herself entering Maddocks' building with a plastic bag in her hand. And this is the kicker. The footage of Maddocks, of Gosha the Wizard, leaving a couple hours later, and he's carrying the same plastic bag that she entered with. It was only after police compared the CCTV footage from all the crime scenes that they realized each time the same man was seen entering and leaving the apartment buildings with a sports bag in 3 different regions of Moscow. So there you go. Once they actually bothered to look at the apartment security footage of each of the murder victims, there he was, coming and going with the same bag under his arm each time. So it wasn't like it took a Sherlock Holmes or Hercule Poirot or whoever the Russian version of that would be to solve this case. It was like, just try it all, please. Try it all, and look what happens. So as for Gosha the Wizard, he went with the old shaggy boombastic excuse, which is, saw banging on the counter, it wasn't me. He went with, yeah, it looks like me, but it's not me. That was his answer. Even though I had...
A lot of people are trying to steal my style, man.
Yeah, man. People are biting my look. Exactly.
Get off my coattails.
Yeah, despite the fact that there was all this evidence that he knew all these women and that he had their possessions in his house and his cigarette butts at their houses and himself on the camera coming and going in all 3 different places, he was like, yeah, it's just my doppelganger. Just my twin.
I was so framed.
Yeah. So at his trial, Maddocks vehemently denied his guilt and often insulted everybody present in the courtroom, including the judge himself. Sounds like a good strategy. When interviewed by the press, he claimed that the deaths were accidental overdoses and that he should be acquitted. As for the various interrogations and the things that he did admit, he claims he was tortured by the police, who electrocuted him, according to him, and didn't allow him to eat for 2 days. He additionally alleged that they planted the drugs at his home. I wouldn't say it's impossible that police plant drugs. On the flip side, considering these were cases that they didn't even investigate and didn't even want to investigate, it seems pretty unlikely that when they finally got around to it, only at the repeated urgings of a member of parliament, that they then showed up with 6.5 kilos of heroin to plant. Are the cops showing up with like a roller bag from the airport, being like, "Knock, knock, can we come in? Yeah, what's in the luggage? Oh, nothing. Can I use your bathroom?" Like, I mean, come on, give me a break. So, on April 22nd, 2014, the Moscow court found Maddocks guilty of the 3 murders, of robbery, and of drug trafficking, and sentenced him to 23 years imprisonment, in addition to requiring him to pay 23 million rubles in damages to the victims' families. Noticeably about 25% less than the number of rubles that he stole from the first Natalia. That seems like kind of a light sentence. 3 murders, robbery, and heroin trafficking, 23 years. I mean, like, 23 years is a long time, but those are 3 fairly serious crimes.
Those are some lives that aren't coming back for any reason.
And like you said, he probably got 20 years for the drug trafficking, a year for the robbery, and 2 years for the murders. I don't know that. I don't mean to be unnecessarily, what's the word? I don't mean to be unnecessarily flippant, but...
Yeah, we don't mean to make stuff up.
No.
But I am, so...
Yeah, I'm just supposing. All right, so at a later date, after he was sentenced to 23 years, his defense did manage to lower his sentence by 1 month. So he got 22 years, 11 months. He was sent to what's called a special regime colony in Siberia.
Is that a gulag?
I believe that is the churched up name for a gulag, yes. A special regime colony in Siberia, which is another, just to bring it full circle here, it's another Rasputin tie-in, right? Where was Rasputin from? Siberia. Where does Gosha end up? Siberia. And he is still there to this day with, I guess, let's see, can I do basic math? 13 years left on his, 14 years left on his sentence. So that is the story of Gosha the Wizard.
Well, these stories just kind of keep themselves perpetuated, don't they? He's going to get out and continue.
He may. I mean, that's the thing. He was in his, he's in his early-ish 40s, I believe. So he's definitely not going to be too old to kill when they release him, especially because he's described as like a huge, muscular man. He's going to have some of that old man prison strength when he gets out of Siberian prison. Probably a lot more dangerous than he was before. Yeah. Everyone, don't get involved with anybody claiming to be a wizard who's going to cleanse your karma and cause your money to multiply like tribbles. Okay, that's my advice. All right, so Anson, I would love to ask you, as I try to do with every guest I'm lucky to have on the show, but I am particularly curious about your story, I have to say, given that I personally am such a big fan of yours. Do you have a kind of murdery story from your own life that you would be willing to share with me and with the listeners?
Yeah. There's one that's maybe a little too close to home that I probably don't think I'm the one that should tell it.
Okay. Okay. Do you want to preview it and then I'll cut it, or do you just want to go to something else? It's totally your call.
Well, my brother-in-law, who I never got the chance to meet, was murdered.
Oh gosh,
that was
yeah. Wow,
that was a disaster.
That's horrible.
But Brenda actually gave me. She said, "If you want to talk about that, you can." And I thought, I don't think that would be the kind. I mean, I wouldn't be able to tell it in a way that would make it.
Maybe sometime you can come back on with Brenda, and she can tell it if she wants. But
that would be more appropriate. I
think so too. So give me another one. And it doesn't have to be like, to me, kind of murdery can run the gamut from something actually terrible something as weird as like I got my pocket picked by a circus dwarf and woke up with a headache type of deal. So
I have something that is a little it's unusual, so it might be interesting.
So you can tell one that airs more on the side of fun, even if you want. It doesn't have to be so dark. However, whatever you want it to.
It's both.
Okay, perfect. That's the show.
It's something that is dark enough to where you have to laugh at it to get over it, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was telling you about killing the spider,
right?
Yeah, I like spiders.
Mm.
I actually, I go out of my way to avoid hurting them,
right?
Because I think they're incredibly interesting. They're beautiful. So
they're also helping us out most of the time. They eat the mosquitoes and all the other stuff that actually harm us.
Right.
Yeah.
And the jumping spiders have a thing for hanging out with me. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But I do have a story that involves a barbecue that went very wrong. This was like in probably 1997. I had some friends over. The idea was to barbecue. And one of my friends brought over some lobster. And I was thinking, I guess that's possible.
Yeah.
They didn't seem to be alive. And so I thought, okay, I should probably cut them in half, maybe, and just put them on the barbecue.
Right. Because again, you couldn't just easily Google how to grill lobster in 1990.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'll be right back.
Yeah. 55 minutes later.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Continue.
Well, okay. So I took a large knife and I cut them in half lengthwise. Mm-hmm. And no protest, no reaction. And I brought them to the grill outside. The guests were standing around on the porch. Mm-hmm. And I put them on the grill and they came to life.
Oh my God.
And it was disturbing. And, everybody's watching. And I had a piece of tinfoil out there that I, was for wrapping something, I guess. But I tried to put the tinfoil over them and just press it down onto them.
God.
And I turn around and I turn around and I'm apologizing to the other people that are watching it, and their eyes are looking past me, and they're all just like white and petrified. And one of my friends says, "Oh, that's much worse." And I turn around and the tinfoil is
undulating.
Just undulating, and your imagination takes over, and it's worse than probably it was.
Oh my God!
But some people left, and it was a disaster for a barbecue.
Oh my God! Wow, that's insane.
And I was the only one that. Well, okay, I didn't feel like eating them, but I did.
And they were delicious. Let me just put that out there.
I'm sure they were. I don't even remember. I just remember, like, this is the least I could do.
Yeah, they can't just be it'd be disrespectful of their agony and death to throw them in the trash. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Kids at home, you always boil them.
Yeah.
I guess it's the only way to...
So
even that sounds barbaric, but it's better than.
Yeah, I have grilled lobster before, but I believe it was previously frozen. Like I bought it at Costco, so like there was no question of it being expired, dead. But yeah, they do. I mean, I have also boiled them, and you hear them scrabbling around in the pot, not for long, and it is a little heart wrenching. But on the other hand, my God, they're so delicious. And part of me also feels like maybe it's not such a bad thing that if we're going to choose to consume animals, and I respect everyone's choices and beliefs. I myself am an unapologetic omnivore, but at the same time, I think that maybe it's healthy to experience something of the animal's suffering and to understand the truth of what you're doing. With modern supermarkets, it's like the meat is it's just in a package. We've become very disconnected from the cycle of life and death that is the reality of eating animals. So as horrifying as it is, I mean, yours is like an absolute horror movie, but I think that it's not necessarily a negative to feel that pang of regret or guilt that the that the animal is dying for you, you know?
I absolutely agree with you. And I mean, I think most people who are, you know, if they want to become vegetarians, you know, tour a slaughterhouse.
Yeah.
It should help. It might give you other problems, but yeah, I think you should face the demons that are part of what you are consuming.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Well, you know, it started as a nice lobster barbecuing story, and then at least spiritually, it felt like it got very kind of murdery there. So I think we nailed the objective there, Anson.
Oh boy.
I gotta say, thank you so much for coming on. So you've got this wonderful website, which is AnsonMaddocks.com. And tell us a little bit about, if I go to AnsonMaddocks.com, what will I find there?
You will find artist proofs. I'm currently trying to pick up, you know, the slack on a backlog with personal, like painting on the backs of the proofs is something that I've been doing for a little while now, and I'm trying to catch up with that. But we have prints and artist proofs, and the prices are all different because of the availability and, you know, rarity of each one. But Brenda is a great communicator. My wife, my business manager.
She's an absolutely wonderful person. I adore her.
She's not like other girls.
No.
She's an unusual and amazing person.
Very cool.
So yeah, you'll be communicating with her, but I hear what she's how she's connecting with people, and it's pretty general, I guess. Our business is dependent on people interested in magic and the collectability of the proofs and whatnot.
And people can also commission card alters, potentially original art, signatures, various things. They just need to get in touch with you and Brenda, and you can make their Anson Maddocks art dreams come true if they go head over to AnsonMaddocks.com. You can also find a link to AnsonMaddocks.com, Anson's website, in the Kinda Murdery show notes for this episode, and I'll be posting it on social media as well. Don't hesitate to reach out. Anson's wife, Brenda, is super kind, awesome, and very responsive. All right, well, before we say goodbye, I did want to mention really quickly, as I often do to everyone listening, that there is a free 3-digit lifeline number, 988, that you can call anytime, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to receive immediate counseling for substance use, mental health, or suicidal thoughts. So God forbid, but if you find yourself in acute crisis, please do call 988, program it into your phone now, and please do remember that the world is a better place with you in it. If you'd like to connect with me, you can also reach out to me at kindamurdery@gmail.com, at kindamurdery on all social media, or you can call 888-MURDERY, 888-687-3379, and I would love it if you called 888-MURDERY to tell me your own Kinda Murdery story so that you can inspire an episode of the show. Anson, once again, thank you so much for being here. It's been something of a dream come true for me to get to spend this time with you. I've admired you since I was literally a small child, so it's not inaccurate to say that you're one of my heroes, and to get to spend all this time with you is just phenomenal. Thank you so much, sir, for your time and for the wonderful stories and insights that you shared with us.
I'm glad I can inspire good things and not bad things.
Absolutely. Well, for Anson Maddocks, I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery.
If you like the show, please subscribe, review, and tell your friends. You can find us on social media at Kinda Murdery or email at kindamurdery@gmail.com.